All right. Well, good evening. I'm Lee Huss. I'm president of the Indiana Forest Woodland Owners Association, and welcome to our presentation of The Nature of Oaks with Doug Tallamy. Since 1977, IFWO has been dedicated to conservation and sustainable management of forest woodlands in Indiana. We advocate for scientific best practices for management to adhere objectives of clean water, wildlife habitat, soil protection, native species diversity, timber production, recreation, carbon sequestration, and many others. In the following days, I welcome you to visit our website and discover the upcoming field days we have planned. I also invite you to consider attending our annual meeting November 4th and 5th at Clifty Falls State Park near Madison. To introduce our speaker, I would like to turn the program over to Executive Director of IFWO, Liz Jackson.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Lee, and welcome. We're excited to have you join us tonight to hear from Dr. Tallamy about his book, The Nature of Oaks. Before I pass to him, I'd like to remind you to keep your microphone muted at all times. Also, please keep your video off during his presentation to limit distractions. When the Q&A starts, you're welcome to turn your video back on if you'd like. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box or use the raise your hand button during Q&A, and we'll moderate your question. This presentation will be recorded and forwarded to you after editing is complete. Doug Tallamy is professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he's authored 97 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for over 40 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways that insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, published by Timber Press in 2007, was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. His other awards include recognition from Audubon, the National Wildlife Federation, the Garden Club of America, and the American Horticultural Association. He has since written The Living Landscape, Nature's Best Hope, and most recently in 2021, The Nature of Oaks, which we will hear about tonight. Tallamy has also founded Homegrown National Parks, a grassroots call to action to regenerate biodiversity and ecosystem function. The concept for Homegrown National Park is a bottom-up call to action to restore habitat where we live and work, extending national parks to our yards and communities. Dr. Tallamy has been a frequent and popular guest among Indiana the past few years, and we're pleased to have him join us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tallamy.
Thank you very much, Liz, and welcome. I'm glad you all could join me tonight. I want to talk to you about the nature of oaks, specifically the species that depend on oaks. But before I do that, let's talk about some headlines we have seen recently. They're all focused on the biodiversity crisis, particularly global insect decline. And believe it or not, that's controversial, even among entomologists. There are several studies that suggest insects may not be declining, at least not everywhere. So I think that's kind of an irrelevant argument. And this is why. When I was born in 1951, the world population was 3 times smaller than it is today. So we've tripled the world population since I've been alive. Dave Wagner, University of Connecticut, has said very clearly, there's no way we can add 8 billion people to the planet without impacting insect populations and populations of just about everything else. So whether they're declining everywhere or not may not be important. Overall, there certainly are fewer insects today than there used to be. And that's because lights kill insects, neonicotinoids kill insects, and wherever it's green up there, we're using a lot of neonicotinoids. Deforestation kills insects, cars kill insects, climate change kills insects. When you take an area like this and you turn it into that, it kills insects. What does all this have to do with oaks? Well, if we're going to fight insect decline, if we're going to fight biodiversity decline, there is no better way, no better tool to use than to plant an oak. And I'm going to tell you why in this talk. I'm going to start with what our house looked like in the year 2000 when we moved in. My wife Cindy and I moved into an area that was that had been farmed, was chopped up into 10-acre lots. And of course, our goal was to put it back together again, try to produce functional ecosystems. The year we moved in, about 1.5 miles down the road, there were a couple of white oaks that dropped acorns. Oh, by the way, this is what most of our property looked like. So before we could plant anything, we had to get rid of these invasives. That's what Cindy's doing right there. And it was 10 acres full of invasives. She did it. So if you're loaded with those non-natives, don't give up. You really can get rid of them, but it leaves big bare spots and you have to plant something. So I gathered up a bunch of the acorns, the white oak acorns, planted them. They germinate right away in the fall. Members of the white oak group do that. And they send down a root, a radical, and then they just sit there the rest of the winter. Then in the spring, they send up their leaves, but that's about all they do that first year. And it gives people the impression that oaks are extremely slow growing. But in fact, they're growing. They're just growing beneath the ground. In the first year of their life, oaks grow 10 times more root biomass than leaf biomass. So even though it appears they're not growing much, they are, and they're establishing a root system that will serve them very well the rest of their long lives. So this is what our house looked like in year one. There's the little oak we're going to follow. I've got a deer cage around it. Our deer love oaks. So if you want oaks to survive, you got to protect them in the beginning. And that's what that tree looked like 18 years later. It's 45 feet tall, 47-inch circumference, canopy spread of 30 feet. Still a baby, of course, but it was a real landscape tree. One of the points I want to make tonight is that oaks are a lifeline to an awful lot of species. There are dozens of bird species that depend on oaks, a number of mammals, including rodents, but the big guys as well, bears and the giant oaks that used to be in our forest. They are mostly hollow in the middle, and the bears would spend the winter there. Raccoons, possums, not that many reptiles depend on oaks, but there are several species of butterflies that are specialists on oaks. Hundreds of species of moths depend on them, as well as the predators and parasitoids associated with those moths. Then we've got literally thousands of species of synipid gall wasps, many beetles, June beetles, longhorn beetles, metallic wood-boring beetles, weevils, and then, of course, lots of spiders and dozens of other arthropods and mollusks and annelids that are associated with the leaf litter underneath oaks. So you have this very diverse web of life that's associated with oaks. And the problem is most people don't know that. It goes unnoticed, and if it's unnoticed, it's certainly underappreciated. And that is why I wrote The Nature of Oaks. It is a month-by-month guide to the life that is very likely on the oak in your yard if you go out and look at it. And the object here is to provide the knowledge. Knowledge generates interest, and interest often generates compassion. And in my view, we need a lot more compassion towards the natural world. So that was my motivation. But first, a few facts. The genus Quercus, the oaks, contains 91 species in North America, 435 species globally, something like 250 species in Mexico. So Mexico really is a hotspot for oaks in the New World. The word Quercus comes from the Celtic quer, meaning fine, and ques, meaning tree, and oaks are indeed fine trees. There are 4 common North American sections, taxonomic sections in the genus Quercus. There is the white oak group, which is called Quercus, the red oak group called Lobate, the live oak group called Verentes, and the canyon oak group, a much smaller group in the West called Protobalanus. This is the distribution of oaks. There is at least one oak species everywhere on this map except where it's brown. So at least 2/3 of the country has a good number of oaks. The center of distribution in North America is the Southeast, but there are a good number of oaks in particularly the southern part of Indiana. Oaks live a lot longer than people give them credit for. Average lifespan is 900 years. 300 years of growth, 300 years of stasis, 300 years of decline. And there are important ecological benefits that come out of each one of those growth stages if we keep the oaks around long enough. The reason most of them don't last that long is because of something that we have done, particularly to their root systems. They can get quite large, and they can live a lot longer than 900 years. There's always a competition around the country. Who's got the oldest oak? Right now, it's probably the Pachenka oak in California, a coastal live oak that's estimated to be around 2,000 years old. But if you really want to look at oak age, you go to the Palmer oak in California. It's a small little scrubby thing that crawls along the ground. You wouldn't even recognize it as an oak. So it roots here and then dies, but roots over here and keeps going. This one has been estimated at 13,000 years old. So these little scrubby oaks can be some of the oldest things on the planet. They can be huge. This is a picture of the Y oak in Y, Maryland. I got to see it before it got blown over in a hurricane. I don't know, probably 20 years ago at this point, but it was enormous, the largest white oak in the country. I do want to stress, though, that there are smaller oaks that we can put in smaller yards, so every one of them is not gigantic. And another thing I'm going to stress is their superior ecological function. They have the highest biodiversity value, meaning they support more species than other plants. They're sequestering more carbon dioxide than most other plants. In other words, they're pulling the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, building their tissues out of that carbon. And even more important, they're pumping carbon into the ground through their root systems as long as they're alive. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have put there over the eons, and oaks are very good at doing that. Because they've got large root systems, they're some of the best soil stabilizers we have. They make what I call the best leaf litter because it lasts the longest. It takes up to 3 years for a single oak leaf to break down. So the benefits of oak leaf litter keep going on and on and on. And all of that promotes healthier watersheds. I started the book in October, and people say, why'd you start in October? Because that was the month that my wife Cindy said, you should write a book about oaks. I said, okay. And it was October, and I looked outside, and that's what our tree looked like. And of course, October is the month that you're recognizing all of those acorns that are falling. Oaks can make a lot of acorns. A single oak can produce up to 3 million acorns in its lifetime. And each one of those acorns is a really nutritious package of food. It's very rich in fats, very rich in protein, and a lot of animals depend on oak acorns. Certainly a lot of our rodents. And again, the bigger mammals, bears lap them up as much as they can. And those cute little squirrels and those even cute little deer that we all know and love. But many birds, turkeys, depend on acorns as well. They're just walking around the forest all fall long, eating every single acorn they can find. And it's one of the main foods that gets them through the long winter. But there's red-bellied woodpeckers, there's titmice, there's towhees, nuthatches, flickers. Lots of birds depend on acorns, including many ducks, particularly wood ducks. Any acorn that falls into the water. You know, if an acorn is viable, it sinks. So it sinks, but the ducks swim down and get those acorns, and they'll come up onto the ground and eat them as well. Then there are a number of invertebrates that depend on acorns, like the acorn weevil. Here's an acorn weevil larva tunneling out of an acorn. That's what the adult looks like. And a similar group of insects that are attacking acorns called acorn moths. There's several species. They all are so similar in appearance, we can't tell them apart without DNA. But the caterpillar develops inside of the acorn, and this is what the moths look like. So you have a lot of things eating acorns. And if you look under an oak tree, maybe 2 weeks after those acorns drop, it's utter destruction. You can't find a viable acorn there. They're all eaten, carried away, crushed, destroyed. So you might wonder how oaks ever successfully reproduce. And that's where a very ancient mutualism between jays and oaks comes to the rescue. Apparently, jays and oaks evolved in what is now the Arctic about the same time, about 56 million years ago. It wasn't cold up there then. And they immediately got to know each other in a very favorable way. Of course, the oaks provided acorns for jays, and they used them for winter food. What did the jays do for oaks? They allowed them to move farther and faster than any other tree genus in the world. And this is how that works. Jays store those acorns for winter food. They don't cache them. They're not putting a bunch of acorns in one place. They will store them individually. They can carry more than one acorn at a time, but they store them underground individually. They'll pick one up, and then here's the key: they'll fly up to a mile before they actually bury that acorn, and that's much farther than any other acorn dispersers carry acorns. They find an area that has been disturbed, where it's easy to push that acorn beneath the soil surface. Now, if they think another jay has seen them, bury that acorn. They'll wait around for a few minutes and then they'll dig it up and move it, because jays know that jays steal acorns. And then, of course, during the wintertime, they're going to go back and find that acorn and have something to eat. Well, jays are very busy in the fall. A single jay can bury up to 4,500 acorns, single jay each fall. But they only remember where 1 out of every 4 acorns is, which means a single jay can actually plant 3,360 oak trees each fall. And if they're doing it a mile away from the parent tree, that allows those trees to disperse farther and faster than any other tree genus. It's not just blue jays that are doing this. All the species of jays do it. This is a scrub jay in Oregon. We have, 7 or 8 species of jays in this country, and they all have a close relationship with acorns. They're not the only birds that depend on acorns. The acorn woodpecker has a very specialized relationship with acorns. They too are depending on acorns to get them through the winter, but they don't bury them underground. They dig holes, tap holes, carve out holes in a snag, and then they store the acorn in that hole. They just stuff it in there, and apparently it lasts better in the winter. This is in the Southwest than if they put it underground, and then they'll eat it throughout the winter. So they form what we call acorn trees, and they become a very valuable resource to a family of acorn woodpeckers. They all work together socially to protect their acorn tree, because an acorn tree can hold 50,000 acorns. And they don't want to do that every single year. They don't want to drill those holes. So they protect that tree and use it year after year after year after year. If you have an acorn tree in your yard, it's enormously entertaining. All right, November is when you might look back and say, well, this was a good year for acorns, or it wasn't such a good year for acorns. There never seems to be much in between. When it's a good year, we call it a mast year, where the particularly members of a particular group produce their acorns at the same time. And then other years, they'll make almost no acorns. So it's a very curious type of reproduction. Most plants reproduce seed pretty much every year. So we have to explain it. Why are oaks masting? There are 4 primary hypotheses: predator satiation, predator reduction, improved pollination, and energy partitioning. And before I go any further, I will tell you they're not mutually exclusive. All of these things could be explaining oak masting. What is predator satiation? Well, that's an acorn weevil larva outside of the acorn. If oaks made about the same number of acorns every year, the number of acorn weevils would stabilize around the number of acorns, and they'd eat just about every one. And that goes for acorn moths. It goes for the rodents that are eating the acorns, the squirrels. But if oaks are really variable in how they produce their acorns, so if they make a whole bunch one year, you'll have a whole bunch of acorn weevils, then the next year there's almost none. That's called predator reduction, because all those predators that were around the first year will then actually starve to death. And if you go a couple of years with very few acorn being produced, then things like squirrels and acorn weevils and other things, those populations remain very low. And then all of a sudden you have another mast year, and you have a lot more acorns than there are predators. That's predator satiation. Improved pollination. Oaks are wind pollinated. So this is the catkin, the male catkin, and right up there is the female flower, very inconspicuous. And an individual oak cannot pollinate itself, because the females don't mature at the same time that the catkins release the pollen. So you need more than one oak in an area so that the pollen can reach the female flowers. Pollination, wind pollination, is a game of chance. So the more pollen you have being released in the air at the same time, the greater the chance of being pollinated. And masting is one of the options that oaks have, producing all their pollen at the same time to get more effective pollination. And finally, energy allocation. By the way, if you wonder whether oaks have good fall color, this is the scarlet oak. They can indeed have very good fall color. Well, there's never enough energy to go around, at least as far as oaks are concerned. So they use it either for growth or they use it for reproduction, but rarely do they do both at the same year. I mean, every year they'll grow a little bit, but if they're going to have a big year for reproduction, they'll put most of their energy into acorn production. So again, those are the 4 hypotheses. They are not mutually exclusive. So they all could be happening at the same time to explain oak masting. December is when you might recognize another curious behavior of oaks, and that is particularly in the white oak group, they don't drop their leaves, particularly among younger oaks. That's a condition called marcescence, where they'll hang on to their leaves all winter long. Very unusual for a deciduous tree. So again, we have to explain it. And here the leading hypothesis is that it wasn't that long ago that there were huge mammals during the Pleistocene, wherever oaks are found. This is the group of large mammals that were in Mexico alone. So there were 3 species of mammoths. There was a giant sloth that could reach up 18 feet, camels and elk, and 44 species of rhinoceros on the planet back then. So a lot of big things that were out there that were eating plant material. Browsing, just like white-tailed deer do today. They're not out there eating grass. They're nibbling on, particularly in wintertime, they're eating woody material, particularly the buds that have all the nutrition in them for the following year's growth. Well, apparently oaks figured out that if you keep your dead leaves surrounding the buds of the coming year, it's very hard to get a mouthful that's not full of dead leaves, and that doesn't taste so good. And the distribution of marcescent leaves supports that. They go up about 18 feet, and above that, there's no more marcescence, and that's as high as those mammals could reach. So, impossible to test that hypothesis at this point, but it does make a nice story. And marcescence also provides a valuable landscape attribute. If you want to use it as a screen, you can, even in the wintertime. So if you don't like your neighbor, you want to screen them out, plant a white oak, and it will be very effective at doing that. All right, January, cold, nobody's outside looking at their oak trees. But if you do, you might look up in the canopy and notice little birds flicking around, things like chickadees and titmice. Of course, they're the birds that are at our feeder. So maybe they're just up there playing. Well, it turns out that chickadees and titmice, only 50% of their diet is seeds in the wintertime. The other 50% is insects and spiders. Maybe they're looking for insects and spiders up there, but it's wintertime. We know there's no insects up there. And then we've got the golden-crowned kinglet, which doesn't eat seeds at all. And yet it doesn't migrate. It sticks around and it's flicking around our trees. Why is that? This is a tiny bird that needs to eat insects all winter long, yet it stays where there aren't any insects. That's called the kinglet paradox. And Bernheinrich doesn't like paradoxes. He's a retired entomologist at this point, writes a natural history column for the magazine Natural History. And he likes to think outside the box. So he looked in the crops of golden-crowned kinglets in Maine in January, and he found they were full of caterpillars in Maine in January. And it turns out there are a lot of caterpillars up there looking like sticks. So we didn't notice them. They're mostly in the family Geometridae, and many of them look a lot like sticks. We don't really have a kinglet paradox anymore. They stick around to eat the caterpillars that do spend the winter in the canopy of our oak trees. When it gets cold, there are antifreeze proteins in the cells of these caterpillars that keep them from bursting. They shrink a little bit, and then when it gets warmer, they swell a little bit, but they're not feeding at all during the winter. They just sit there. We don't have a kinglet paradox, but the next question is, why are they there? What are caterpillars spending the winter there, particularly vulnerable to all the birds that are eating them? Well, again, we don't really know, but a good guess is that they have a head start on anything else when the leaves expand in the springtime. Most insects overwinter as eggs or as pupae or chrysalids, very few as adults. But all of those, if you overwinter as an egg, you got to hatch out your tiny little caterpillar. If you overwinter as an adult, you got to find a mate and then lay the egg. Same thing with a chrysalis or a pupa. So if you overwinter as a mature larva, you have first dibs on all those leaves that come out, and you have a tremendous competitive advantage in the spring. February is the quietest time of year for oaks, so it's a good time to talk about what I call oak landscaping myths. Of course, myths often are based on some degree of fact. So let's try to tease apart fact from fiction in here. Oaks are too expensive to use. I hear that all the time. They grow too slowly to use as landscape plants. I also hear that. I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. They get too big to use in small lots. If we do use them, they fall over and crush our house, or they're going to lift up our sidewalk, our hardscape. Fact or fiction? Well, oaks can be too expensive, but only if you insist on instant gratification. So, people want to build a landscape. They want it to be done on day one. So they plant the biggest trees they possibly can. And nurserymen have figured out that's good. You can charge you a lot of money. They have learned how to grow big trees in pots. They call them air pots, and it minimizes root binding. That's what a root bound tree looks like. You certainly don't want to buy one with root bound, where the roots go around and around. And then if you plant it, those roots will continue to go around and actually strangle themselves, and the tree will die very young. That doesn't happen with an air pot, but the root mass is extremely small compared to the size of the tree, which means when you plant it, it has to spend a lot of time establishing a root mass big enough to support that tree without growing a whole lot. There was a planting of, I should have counted them all. It was at least 10 oaks in Newark, Delaware, a couple of summers ago. Every single one died. That's a lot of money down the drain. So something went wrong when they chose those big trees. Another option, and I don't know what they used, but the other option is, of course, a bald and burlap tree. Very hard on the tree because you have to chop the roots off again. You get a big tree with very little root mass to support that tree. Here's the interesting thing now, and you can try it because it really works. Get a big bald and burlap tree, plant it, and the same day plant an acorn of the same species. In 10 years, the acorn will be bigger and much healthier than this tree that you spent $3,000 on, because it'll be able to put out its root mass that'll support rapid growth after that, that'll continue to grow rapidly. Whereas this one's going to struggle to put on root mass. It's got a 50% chance of dying, and it's very expensive. So this is an ideal size to plant oaks. Nurserymen don't want to sell them that way because they can't make a lot of money that way, but you'll get a healthier tree actually much faster if you do that. But it leads to the next question. Do they grow so slowly that we're just not patient enough to wait for that? Well, let's have a race. This is the oak that we're following here in my yard. It's 6 years old now. So in 6 years, it has grown. And this is my little friend, Bella. No, she's not my daughter. She's not my granddaughter. She was our surrogate granddaughter until we got some real ones. And she's 2 years old here. She loved this tree. So I decided to take a picture of her next to this tree every year. And we're going to have a race. Who's going to win? We all know white oaks grow really slowly. So maybe Bella can catch up. All right. The oak is 6 years old here. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Bella's losing. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And there's 2020. Bella is 16 years old here. She's got her mask on, so we'll always know when it was. And the tree has certainly beaten Bella. So look, once you get through that early slow growth period, it grows as fast as anything else. And Bella's 5'11", by the way. She's not a shrimp. So I'm going to reject that as a myth. Oaks do not grow too slowly to use as landscape trees. But here's another important point. They contribute ecologically to your landscape, to your little ecosystem the very first year. This is a pin oak that has just popped its head above the leaves, and here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. In other words, this tiny little oak has produced a caterpillar that then becomes bird food. Immediately, your oaks start to support the food web around you, and that is their main job. Are oaks too large to use in small yards? Well, you're not going to find anybody that recommends a large oak for a small yard, although you see it from past plantings. These are two big red oaks in tiny little yards. I drive by them on the way to work at the University of Delaware. They probably were planted at the same time that this house was built, about 100 years ago. And remember, 100 years ago, there was no air conditioning. So these oaks lowered the temperature of the house by 10 degrees. Very valuable ecosystem service. They have not fallen over and crushed the house. They haven't lifted up the hardscape. So this house has gotten away with it. Here we got a very large oak next to a very large church. Fortunately, they didn't chop it down when they built the church. Here's a big Oregon oak, very big, next to a house. So it can happen. But again, nobody's going to recommend that. The important thing is we do have small species of oaks, not just that Palmer oak that's going to crawl along the ground. The yellow highlighted ones here are all the species of dwarf tiny oaks in Texas alone. But here's the dwarf chestnut oak, Quercus prinoides. That's the one you're most likely to run into in the nursery trade. Produces acorns when it's 5 feet tall. That's what one looks like in my yard. I'm looking down on it. So it's a great option for people that don't have very big yards. And here's another option I wish people would try. I found this on the web, but it's a great idea. Coppice your oaks. So when it gets to be 2 or 3 inches in diameter, chop it off at the base and it'll come back as a shrub. This one was either a red oak or a scarlet oak, not sure. But you get an oak bush and you can chop it off as many times as you want and maintain a valuable a bit of foliage in your yard without it getting very big. So try it, see if it works. Are oaks going to fall over and crush your houses? Well, of course they can. Any tree can. And of course, if it does, you will hear about it on the news. The news only reports bad news. And it makes it seem like every tree we ever plant will fall over and crush our houses. And of course, the way we plant them encourages that. We plant every tree as a specimen tree. It's not close to another tree. We don't want it to compete for light or nutrients at all, so it can reach its full majesty. But then you get a lot of rain and a windstorm that follows it, and boom, over they go. This is the way trees grow in the forest. They grow close enough together that their roots are interlocked in a matrix. It's extremely strong. Here's a stream cut near my house. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 trees, maybe one in the back there, with their roots totally interlocked with each other. Nothing's going to blow that over. You might get a tornado that comes and snaps them off, but there is no landscaping trick that's going to protect you from tornadoes. But in the meantime, it's extremely stable. So rather than this, consider this. These are the 2 white oaks that we got our original acorns from down the road. That's a 3-foot distance there. Nobody planted these trees. They just grew there naturally. Then they put the road in after that. They're still there, have not blown over. Neither one is as big or spectacular as it would be alone, but we learned to view these trees together, as I call them, tree groves. This is called the Three Sisters in Northwest Connecticut, 3 red oaks that, again, growing very close together. And here is a planned unnatural planting. This is at Mount Cuba Center in Hockessin, Delaware. That's a big red oak in the back there. These are hemlocks. This is big rhodies down here in hardscape. It's a planned landscape, but it's also extremely stable. All these roots are interlocked together. It provides good habitat. It's beautiful. We're viewing it as a grove, a unit of trees. So if you have 3 or 4 acres of lawn and you're wondering what to do with them, I suggest making a planting like this. Take up a lot of space and it'll be a whole lot more productive than that lawn is. Are oaks going to lift up our hardscape? Well, again, they can, depending on what we plant them over. If you plant them over bedrock, the roots have nowhere to go other than laterally. They will lift up whatever they hit. If you plant them over agricultural pan, and you have to watch that in Indiana, where the plow went down, 12, 15 inches for a century, and the soil below where the plow went gets really, really compacted. That's called pan, and it's very tough for tree roots to get through that pan. So if you know you're over agricultural pan, break it up before you put a tree in. Get a ripper or a pickaxe or something, break it up, and then the roots will go down and it'll be fine. This is a pin oak right next to this road here, hasn't lifted up at all. So the roots obviously could get down very well. 3 very big red oaks at the University of Delaware. Those are big trees right next to the curb. No problem at all, because there's the space for those roots to go down. So it is not at all a given that your oak tree is going to ruin your hardscape. Okay, March is when those leaves actually do fall. That's the end of marcescence. So it's a good time to talk about oak leaves. There's a lot of variation in oak leaves. A lot of people think all oaks have lobes, either pointed or rounded lobes. Not true. Some of them have very tiny lobes and some have no lobes at all. This is a shingle oak. Some of them look like holly leaves. This is a willow oak. This looks like a willow leaf. So a tremendous amount of variation in oak leaves. And they make a lot of leaves. A single large tree can make 700,000 leaves each year. And if you line them up on a tennis court, it'll cover 4 tennis courts. And that's their job, to cover the ground. We have a very vibrant soil community when we protect it with leaf litter. And people worry, well, if I leave the leaves on my flower beds, the plants won't be able to get through. But in a normal layer of leaf litter, they can get through. This is a fern. It's not a planting. It's natural. They had no trouble getting through the oak leaves that are underneath it. And it's important that you have a balanced ground community like this, because there are more species that live in the ground than there are above the ground. In a 1 square meter of oak leaf litter, there are 250,000 mites, 100,000 springtails, little columbullans like the sminthuriid here, 90,000 protorians, very primitive insects. You need a microscope to see them, and 1 million nematodes. That's a lot of life under there. They're all small, and most of them are detritivores, the things that are breaking down the leaf litter. It's a major reason we want to keep leaf litter on our properties. Think of leaf litter the way we think of water now. When water falls, we want it to all stay on our property so it can soak in and recharge the water table. Well, when leaves fall, we want them to all stay on our property so they can be broken down and return the nutrients that were used by the tree that previous year, so the tree can use it again. It's one of the reasons that our trees don't live as long as they should, because we rake away the leaves every year, removing the nutrients that they need. So we're essentially starving them to death. Plus, there are a lot of things that depend on that leaf litter. Some of them quite beautiful. This is the banded hair streak. The caterpillar develops on leaves like this on the ground. You'll never find the caterpillar because it blends right in. But those adults are pretty common, so they must be there. There are also 70 species of what we call litter moths. These are moths where the caterpillar eats dead leaves, things like the ambiguous litter moth, the American idea, the dark spotted palthus, and 67 other species that are there. When you watch your winter sparrows, things like the white-throated sparrow or juncos, it looks like they're doing a little dance in your leaf litter. They're hopping and pushing leaves backwards. What they're doing is looking for the caterpillars of these guys that are under those leaves. That's what sustains many of our birds through the wintertime. And then, of course, you have all of the predators that are after the living things in this leaf litter, like the carabid ground beetles and lightning bugs. People say, where'd the lightning bugs go? That's what or fireflies. That's what an adult firefly looks like. They're not a bug and they're not a fly. They're actually beetles. There's the lantern that lights up. But that's what a larval firefly looks like. Looks like a little prehistoric dinosaur. It's a predator in leaf litter. So if you don't have any leaf litter in your yard, you're not going to have any fireflies. They're eating snails and other arthropods in that leaf litter. And again, people worry, can my plants get up through the leaf litter? Here's leaf litter at my house. I have not raked anything away. And here wood poppy's having no trouble at all getting through them. This is Pachysandra, native Pachysandra, no problem with the leaf litter. Virginia creeper makes a great ground cover, by the way. Again, no problem with the leaf litter. So keeping the leaves on your property in your flower beds is the way to go. And before you ask me, can I chop them up with my mower? Well, you can, but it shortens their lifespan. Remember, each one of those leaves will last up to 3 years doing their job. If you use maple leaves or tulip tree leaves or birch leaves, they don't even make it through a single summer. And then you end up with bare soil, which is that's a no-no for that soil community. It dries out, you have soil erosion. But when you have long-lasting oak leaf litter, it protects the soil. Chopping them up shortens that and also chops up all the living things that are in that leaf litter. Okay, April, this is when the buds finally break, and it's a chance for you to see one of the most ephemeral interactions that occurs in all of nature. It takes about 5 minutes a year. It happens a lot, but you have to be there at the right 5 minutes. And I'm talking about when synipid gall wasps lay their eggs in the buds of oaks. This is a female synipid gall wasp. There's her ovipositor. She's injecting it into this bud. This is a male that has already mated with her. So the egg she's laying in here has been fathered by this guy, but she's going to lay another egg after she lays this one in another bud, and he wants to be there when she does so he can father that as well. This is a male who wishes he was this male. So here she is, she's laying an egg in this bud. Not only is she laying an egg in there, but she's injecting it with plant hormones to direct the growth of the tissues around that egg. So the cells in a bud are undifferentiated meristematic cells. Think of them as stem cells. They can go in any direction. And they form these galls, and people say galls are like cancerous growths. I don't like that as a description, because a cancerous growth is uncontrolled growth. Gall growth is highly controlled growth, so highly controlled that the the galls that result from a particular species of gall wasp are species specific. You can identify which species of gall wasp it was by looking at the type of gall. There are a lot of gallers out there. 5,000 species of synipid gallers are associated with oaks worldwide. A single oak tree can support 70 different species of gallers. And it's hard to find an oak that does not have galls. Many of them are hollow, like this apple oak gall or oak apple gall. You can find it written both ways. And when you cut that open, it's mostly hollow. There's a disc in the middle. The galler itself is inside that disc as a larva. Then you've got all this space. So you've got to wonder why. What is this space all about? Well, it turns out that gallers have more parasitoids, more insects, particularly wasps, other wasps that are they're parasitoids of synipids. They're laying their eggs in a synipid and developing on them. So more natural enemies than any other type of insect. Maybe it's because they're sitting ducks. So the gallers have to fight back. They have to try to protect themselves. This is a pterimid parasitoid, and look at the length of that ovipositor. So the space between the galler itself and the outside of the gall has to be bigger than this ovipositor. Otherwise, the pterimid will be able to parasitize it. When the gall is young, the space is not bigger, and the galler can reach the parasitoid can reach the galler, but these things grow really quickly and separate the center of the gall from the outside in just a few days. This is the pterimid with the longest ovipositor in California, and it creates the largest gall that we have because the galler has to be out of reach of that very long ovipositor. There's a lot of variation in gall morphology. Some of them are quite pretty. Some of them are just round spheres on leaves. Some of them are round spheres on stems. Some of them look like candy. Some of them look like that. A lot of them look like plant diseases. We mistake them for plant diseases. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are often many galls on a single leaf. Some of them look like spindles. Others look like more candy. This is one in my yard that looks like pottery. My favorite, the little gnome house gall in California. There's a brain gall. So a lot of variation out there. This is a single oak leaf that has 4 galls on it, but there were multiple gallers emerging from each gall. So this single leaf produced, a couple hundred gallers for sure. And galls have played an important role in our recorded history of humans. Because if you grind up a gall like this and mix it with particular chemicals, it makes an indelible black ink. And that is the ink that the Bible was written with. The Magna Carta was written with gall ink. The Declaration of Independence was written with gall ink. All of our important writings of the scribes and monks and Leonardo da Vinci and all of those guys used gall ink. So that is another factoid you can share at the next cocktail party. Okay, May is when the oak leaves fully expand and the new year really gets going. And of course, following the expansion of those oak leaves all over the temperate zone comes the caterpillars that eat those oak leaves. And following the appearance of those caterpillars comes the birds that eat those caterpillars. It is no coincidence that migrating birds follow on the heels of those caterpillars eating the expanding leaves very, very closely. And if you are a birder, you know the best place to look for warblers is in an oak. I had a student several years ago, Christy Beal, that actually quantified the amount of minutes, the number of minutes that warblers were found foraging in different types of trees in cemeteries. So these are named by the family name, but the Fagaceae here, that includes the oaks and the beeches and the chestnuts. But in her study sample, there were only oaks. There were no beeches and chestnuts. These are pines, these are birches, and so on. Look, the warblers spent almost all of their time in oaks. Why is that? Because that's where the food is. And the food is caterpillars in the springtime. Plants have not made seeds or berries yet, so they're looking for insects, primarily caterpillars, things like this purple-crested slug, the buck moth, the white-marked tussock moth, the saddle prominent, double-line prominent, white-dotted prominent, the checkered fringe prominent, the laugher, the lace-cap caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the skiff moth, the white blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded hair streak, the red line panapoda, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasa, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug. These guys are called slugs, not because they're slugs, because their head is tucked up underneath. And they kind of look like slugs, but they're not. The streaked dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the red humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak caterpillar, and my favorite, the spun glass slug caterpillar, the prettiest one in the whole country, and literally hundreds more. And by the way, all of those pictures I just showed you are on oaks right in my yard. And that's what my yard looks like today. Got a little lawn here, but we put a lot of plants back in our effort to regenerate ecosystem function. And my research has shown over the years that oaks are, that caterpillars are really important components of food webs. And if you know the number of species of moths, not butterflies, but moths in your food web, you know how stable it is and how productive it is. So 5 years ago, I started to actually count the number of species of moths that are making a living at my house. I'm still at it, but I'm up to 1,192 species of moths that I have found so far. 28% of them use oaks. And because so many of those species are types of bird food, we've recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. So those caterpillars are moving energy up the food web. And because so many of them depend on oaks, I call oaks keystone species. Remember what a keystone is. That's the stone in the middle of the arch, the Roman arch. When you take the stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone species out of your local food web, the food web collapses because the keystone species are making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. And oaks are the best at doing that. They support over 950 species of caterpillars nationwide. No other plant genus comes close to that. Why do we need so many caterpillars? They are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So a landscape without a lot of caterpillars is essentially a dead landscape. It's going to have a failed food web and eventually a failed ecosystem. And the way the birds treat those caterpillars really illustrates why we need great numbers. It takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And the parents continue to feed them caterpillars after they leave the nest for another 21 days. Tens of thousands of caterpillars to make a bird that's a third of an ounce. And that's one bird. So we want lots of birds in our yards, and we need the plants that make lots and lots and lots of caterpillars. And oaks are the best at doing that. Right, June is cicada month. And I'm really talking about the arrival of the periodical cicada, at least at my house last year. I don't think Indiana had some periodicals. You'll have to remind me when I stop. But it's an interesting phenomenon. Of course, it's predictable. Every 17 or 13 years, these things emerge from underground where they have been sucking on plant roots, sucking out the xylem, which is essentially water, which is why trees can have a lot of these things on them without it hurting the tree. But the news media knew that was going to happen. So they did what they like to do, and that is vilify nature, try to scare everybody into thinking this was going to be a terrible scourge. It was going to be an invasion. They were going to be so loud that mothers would go crazy and kill their babies. You should move. I heard all these things on the news, believe it or not. And of course, the cicada emergence was none of those things. Mike Raup at the University of Maryland calls it the entomologist's Super Bowl, because it's great. It's one of the most fantastic biological events you'll ever be privileged to witness. And it was a big one in Newark, Delaware this year. Those are the shed exoskeletons, the exuvii of the nymphs after they came out of the ground. And of course, when they crawl up, they aerate the soil. So you don't have to hire anybody to do this. They're allowing oxygen and water to get down to the roots. Very important ecosystem service. And there were so many that came out that, 11 Mississippi kites flew up from who knows where and stayed for 2 weeks eating our cicadas. And then they went away again. So here's the basic life cycle. They come out at night and they hang upside down, and they split the back of their skin, their exuvii, hang down, then swing up and what they're doing is hardening their exoskeleton. They're tanning it. So right now they're like a soft-shelled crab, extremely vulnerable, which is why they do this at night. But after a couple hours, they're all tanned up and they're ready to go and start their life cycle. And they do. If you're a male, you fly and you start to sing. And by singing, you've got two membranes called tympana in your thorax that you vibrate back and forth. They're really like little clicks. Picture a Coke can where you're clicking it, click, 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 click. They do it fast, like 400 clicks a second, and it causes a buzz. And their goal is to attract a female with that buzz. And the loudest male attracts the female the fastest. Well, this guy was successful. He attracted a female. They mated. And now it's her turn. She's going to lay eggs in the twigs of trees. And they love oaks. So here's her ovipositor right here. She's jamming it into a pin oak branch in my front yard. That's hard to do. Get a pin yourself and stick it into a pin oak branch and see if you can do it without bending the pin. She does it. She gets it all the way in there. Then she lays an egg. Then she lays another one and another one and another one, 7 or 8 eggs in a row. And then she'll fly off and do it again on another branch. And from the point where she does that out, the branch typically dies. It's called flagging. There's a lot of flagging on this tree. And people get upset. Oh, he's going to kill my tree. Not going to kill your tree. He's going to prune your tree. And it happens once every 17 years. So your tree can handle it. The little guys hatch, fall to the ground, tunnel underground, and start 17 years of sucking on xylem. I had a student look at which trees the cicadas preferred when they laid their eggs by counting the flags on trees, again, in Newark, Delaware. And the green bars are types of oaks, so they definitely did prefer oaks over other types of trees. And then they die. That's it. Takes about 3 weeks. And of course, the question is, why do they spend 17 years underground? And the leading hypothesis, again, is predator satiation. They come out by the millions, and there is no predator that can build up its populations and wait 17 years without eating for the appearance of these cicadas again. So a lot of things eat cicadas, but not their populations are never large enough to actually control them when they emerge. Okay, July, this is when the night chorus begins. And by the night chorus, I'm talking about katydids singing. You probably can hear katydids singing right now. It's still warm enough. These are males again. And what they do is they raise their front wings and move them back and forth. A scraper and a file on the sclerotized portion of the leaf here makes a characteristic katydid sound. Why are they doing that? Well, this is why. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Katy who fell in love with a handsome young man. Alas, he did not share her feelings and he married another. Soon thereafter, he and his young bride were found poisoned in their bed. Who perpetrated the crime was never determined, but some say the insects in the trees were watching that night, and each summer they solved the mystery by singing katydid, katydid. I grew up listening to that sound as I was camping many summers in a row. Very, very fond memories of that sound. And when you have a lot of males doing that, it can get quite loud. Again, the loudest male is the one that wins the female. Speaking of females, there's a female with the ovipositor ready to go. She's not mature yet. There she is, mature. Her wings have fully expanded. And she is responding to the loudest male. So that's why they're all competing for who can sing the loudest. When she lays her eggs, she glues them along a twig or so. Sometimes you find these eggs are quite large. These guys have already hatched, but people wonder, what the heck could that be? Those are katydid eggs. Katydids will start singing in July. They'll sing right through August into September, and they'll sing until it gets cold enough to knock them out. Getting a little slower now. Okay, August is a very tough time for leaf chewers. Early in the spring, of course, oak leaves are very tender, very easy to eat, very nutritious. But by August, there's a lot of tannins and lignins that have built up in those leaves, and they're as tough as a board. So you'd think nothing would be able to eat them. But caterpillars have developed adaptations that allow them to get around that toughness. One of them is eating together, being gregarious. A lot of little mouths can cut through that tough leaf material easier than a single mouth. These are yellowneck caterpillars when they're small. There they are when they're big. They can eat quite a bit of oak leaf material. This is the orange hump oakworm, the pink striped oakworm. So gregarious feeding behavior in oak caterpillars is a pretty common trait. I counted the number of caterpillars on our oak tree in 2014, just walking around the bottom of the tree and looking at the branches. And I got 410 caterpillars. 115 of them were yellow neck caterpillars, those large ones eating a lot of material. And people get upset. You know, if I knock on your door and say you got 410 caterpillars on your oak tree, call the man, get the spray can, save the tree. You don't have to save the tree. The tree is doing its job. It's passing on some of the energy that it has fixed from the sun. And look, you can't see any of those caterpillars. I took this picture right after I counted those caterpillars. You can't see the caterpillars and you can't see the damage those caterpillars have created. A woman in New Orleans, Tammany Baumgarten, once said, we should all practice the 10-step program. Take 10 steps back from your trees and all of your insect problems will disappear. And I think that is excellent advice. Another adaptation is to become a leaf miner, where you're actually eating between the tough areas of the leaf, the epidermis, outer epidermis, and lower epidermis, the parenchymal cell tissues, the palisade mesophyll, very soft, and that's where the nutrition is. But you've got to be really small and really thin to do that. This is a serpentine leaf mine. The egg is laid here, and the little guy developed and crawled right through the leaf material. The black line is its frass. That's where its poops are. And then right here, pupated, and that's all the leaf it's going to eat in its entire life. This is a blotch leaf mine. There's the caterpillar right in there that just kind of goes around in a circle. Here it is backlit, and here it is with a very nice picture from Salvador Batanza. It doesn't look much like a caterpillar. Because of all those adaptations for being small and very, very flat. But when it comes out as an adult, it does look like an adult. This is one of the Chamaemeria species, solitary oak leaf miner, gregarious oak leaf miner, the oak tentiform leaf miner, a lot of species of leaf miners on oaks. Okay, September, it's the last month that we're going to talk about the peak of cricket populations. And of course, most people think of the crickets, the black crickets on the ground. And if one gets in your house and sings, it's good luck, by the way. But there are other crickets up on the vegetation, tree and bush crickets. They're either green or yellowish or brownish, but they're not black. And they look like that. And the males are doing the same things that the cicadas and the katydids are doing. They're trying to find a mate by singing. But they're very smart about it. They will find a hole in a leaf that is the right size, or they'll actually chew a hole of the right size. Then they stick their head through it, lift their wings up and move them back and forth and make their cricket sounds. Well, most leaves have a slight parabolic shape to them, so that projects the sound farther and louder than if he sang on a flat surface. So he's sending the message that I'm a big, powerful male, but it's a false message to the female. Can you believe a male would send a female a false message? Well, these guys do. And the female comes and mates with them. So you might think he's really tricked the female, but it could be that he's the smartest male, and that's good enough for the female. September is also a great time to see walking sticks in the order Phasmida. They're called walking sticks because they look like sticks and they walk. I found this one on an emery oak in Arizona. But often they spend the entire summer up in the canopy eating. They love oak leaves, but they'll start to come down or fall out of the trees in the fall. And that's when we often run into them. The females have an interesting behavior for when they're laying their eggs. They just walk along the canopy and drop the eggs to the forest floor. Some of them hatch that year. Some of them wait till the next year. And a few of them wait 2 years down the road. It's bet hedging to make sure that the conditions are right for when those eggs hatch. And there's an interesting relationship with ants that people have discovered. This is a bloodroot, of course, and there are, bloodroot seeds in that pod. That pod will open up, dehisce, and there are the seeds. They've got these little white structures on them called elaiosomes. And it turns out that ants love those elaiosomes. So the ant will come along and he'll pick up the seed, carry the seed with the elaisome back to the colony. They will eat the elaisome, but the seed's too hard. So they throw the seed in their garbage dump, which is about 1 inch below the soil surface. It's a perfect place for the bloodroot and other spring ephemerals with elaiosomes to germinate. Well, that's what walking stick eggs look like. And a lot of people think that is mimicking an elaisome. And I think there's got to be some chemical mimicry going on here as well, because the ants pick up these walking stick eggs and they take them back to their their hive and they discover there's nothing really to eat. So they throw them in their garbage den, which is a perfect place for these eggs to spend the winter until they hatch the next spring. Okay. We've created a biodiversity crisis on planet Earth. We've got two major crises. We've got climate change, certainly a big one, but we've got this biodiversity crisis, the loss of the living things that support us. And if we had no climate change, we would still have a biodiversity crisis. You hear about how things are disappearing. We've lost 3 billion birds, breeding birds in North America. We've got global insect decline. Everything's disappearing. They're not disappearing. We're actively killing them. We're killing our birds. We're killing our insects. We're killing the nature that supports us. And that's why we're now in the 6th great extinction that this earth has ever experienced. So it is not good. It is a global crisis, but it has a grassroots solution. In other words, it's one that you and I can address, and we can address it successfully. There are 4 things that every landscape has to do every day. One is capture carbon, pull that carbon out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, manage the watershed in which it lies, support a diverse community of pollinators, not because they help agriculture, but because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. So we need pollinators, not just next to a farm. And every landscape has to support a complex food web. In other words, pass the energy on from plants to other animals so that we have a diverse and functional ecosystem. When you plant an oak, you are addressing all 4 of those goals, believe it or not. You're planting a tree that is the best at carbon capture, that's the best at watershed management, that's the best at supporting a complex food web, and it even contributes to pollinator support. It may not be the best, but remember, it's wind pollinated. How are oaks supporting pollinators? Well, I kept hearing reports. Well, bees are actually going to oak catkins when they're in bloom. And here comes one right now. I just looked out my upstairs window and there they come. They were indeed collecting oak pollen. They don't move it to a female flower, so they're not pollinating, but they are benefiting from oak pollen. So planting a tree that addresses all 4 of those goals, what could be better than that? But despite all of those wonderful landscape attributes, oaks are in trouble. The old giants from our forests are gone. We cut them down for lumber, or we cut them down because they're in the way of our crops. The percentage of oaks in our eastern forests has been cut in half in the last century, largely because we've suppressed fire, and fire encourages oaks. And we've also introduced a lot of very serious oak pests and diseases. Of course, the gypsy moth, which is no longer the gypsy moth, it is the spongy moth. Sudden oak death syndrome, oak leaf scorch, bacterial oak leaf, or bacterial leaf wilt. These are serious diseases that are clobbering our oaks right now, and they're all introduced by us. Deer overabundance is a terrible issue for oaks and for many other plants too, because every single baby oak that pops its head above the ground is eaten by a deer. And it's preventing oak regeneration. So we've got big oaks in the forest, but nothing replacing them. And then we've got habitat fragmentation. Our oaks are now so separated in a lot of places that because they're wind pollinated, the pollen can't reach those female flowers. So eggcorn production is reduced. And because of all those reasons, 28 of our 91 North American oak species are now threatened. 1/3 of global oaks are endangered. The Oregon white oak has been lost from 97% of its range. It used to occur from Central California all the way up through Washington, gone from 97% of its range. There are 2,300 species that rely on oaks in Great Britain that are now threatened. 2,300 species because of the loss of oaks in Great Britain. Well, we humans live our life out in a very brief instant of ecological time, and we cannot return those giant oaks to our forest in that time period. But we can start the process. We must start the process. And in no time at all, you will see how rapidly those young oaks assume their keystone positions in our yards, in our ecosystems. We're all responsible for good earth stewardship because we all require it. We all require healthy ecosystems. So we all have the responsibility of taking care of them. And the best way to exercise your responsibility towards good earth stewardship is to embrace the power of oaks. So for the sake of our turkeys, our chickadees, our woodpeckers, our warblers, our woodpeckers, what is that? That's a jay, our jays, thrushes, our lightning bugs, our fireflies, our gallers, our weevils, our orthopterans, our lepidopterans, our caterpillars. For our own sakes, plant an oak, plant a living community, plant the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tallamy.
You're welcome.
That was very interesting, and I was thrilled to hear your descriptions. You make it come to life, and the photos are amazing as well. So I really appreciate you meeting with us tonight. If anyone has questions, I could moderate a few. We have a little bit of time until we wanted to close. You can put those in the chat box. I do have a few in here, and I will go ahead and start. Have you had enough water? Do you need another minute? And before I do, I would like to remind you, we are recording this, and we'll let you know when it's available for viewing. And also, if you're interested in seeing Dr. Tallamy in person, he is coming to the University of Evansville on October 1st. It's a free presentation, but needs registration. I will put information on that event in the chat box. I'm not quite sure who's hosting that, but I did find it online. So, and if you're interested in learning more about the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association, I'll also put information there. The first question I had was from Debbie. You talked a bit about leaves and leaving them. She has an oak whose leaves are covering her shade plants like her Linton. Should she leave them?
She should estimate what a natural layer of leaves in. Don't pile them up 5 feet deep. That will crush or prevent any plant underneath from making it. But normal leaf litter works its way down. Most of our herbaceous plants die off during the winter time anyway, and those oaks are they're moderating the temperature, and they're keeping a constant measure of humidity and moisture in the soil. So a lot of our seeds and perennials actually prefer to be covered by leaves like that. If you get, it's a judgment call. If you get the sense that there's simply too many there, then, rake them off gently. But the only place you really need to get the leaves off of is your lawn. But if you listen to any of my other talks, you'll know we want to reduce the area we have in lawn. And where can we put them? We put them in our flower beds. It's a great way to create a new flower bed, by the way. Let's say you've got a tree with no flower bed around it, rake your leaves to there and rake them quite thickly. And that's a great way to smother that grass and then just plant right through that the following spring. My son bought a new house a couple of years ago, and the first fall he called me up and he said, "Dad, I've got too many leaves. What should I do with them?" And I said, "Rake them into your flower beds." He said, "I don't have enough flower beds." And I said, "Exactly. That is the solution. Get more flower beds."
I approve of that message for sure. Alan asked, can you please ask if acorn weevils are non-native, if any acorn weevils are non-native?
Well, none that I know of. I don't know of any that are non-native. That doesn't mean that I just don't know it, but I have not heard of that. I think they're all native.
Okay, great. Carrie asked, and you spoke of this briefly, but maybe you have more to add. Do you recommend using oak leaf litter for gardening, for perennial gardens, vegetable gardens, both or neither?
Well, oak leaf litter is going to encourage the acidification of your soil. So for vegetable gardening, a lot of things like squashes and stuff want neutral or basic soil. So I wouldn't recommend it for vegetables that require higher pH. But for perennials, particularly ones that do well in fairly acidic soil, I do recommend it. It's great.
Okay. What kind of oak might be best in Indiana in a residential yard? There are some oaks in the neighborhood already.
It would depend on the soil that you have, and that's going to vary as you move around Indiana. There are oaks that like acidic soil. There are oaks that like basic soil. There are oaks that like wet soil. There are oaks that like dry, rocky soil. So you want to pick the ones that are best under the conditions that you have. Residential neighborhoods, I always see white oaks. I always see pin oaks. Pin oaks tend to be overused. That's Quercus palustris, the oak of the swamp. They want wetter soils, and we put them in dry street corners and then wonder why they struggle. Southern Indiana, you have shoe-marred oak. That the dry, rocky soils, chestnut oaks would do well. So there are lots of oaks that would do well in. Of course, the classic red oak is a great choice.
Patrick asks, can you quickly talk through the process of planting an oak, time of year, pot or no pot, etc.?
Okay. If you actually get my book, The Nature of Oaks, in the end, I do have a how to plant an oak little section there. So this will be quick. It depends on which group your oak acorn comes from. The white oak groups germinate in the fall, so you've got to plant them in the fall. Red oak groups, so that's red oak and pin oak and scarlet oak, they germinate in the spring, so you can put them in a Ziploc bag with some peat moss, a little bit of moisture, and put them in the fridge. That protects them from rodents very nicely. Then you just plant them in the spring, and they'll have much higher survivorship. It depends on where you're planting them. The first year we moved here, our landscape was barren. Nothing was here. And when I planted the acorns, I had great survivorship. Today, when I do that, they're all eaten by all the things that I brought here. So we got a lot of things that like those acorns. And what I have to do today is plant them in a pot, either in the spring or the fall, and let them grow up for a couple months anyway before I put them in the ground. The biggest challenge is to keep the rodents from eating the acorns out of the pot. The squirrels and the mice, they will climb right up there and they'll eat that acorn. So, you build a cage with wire or something, you got to keep those guys out. You do want to expose it to normal winter weather. So it's not just a matter of bringing it inside. That's the biggest challenge of getting an oak going. But once you plant it, there's nothing special about it. If you're going to put an oak in the ground, or an oak acorn in the ground, just lay it on its side and maybe a ½ inch down. Doesn't have to go any deeper than that. And the root will come out and go straight down. You don't want it to be in the pot very long because they do send down a big taproot and they start growing rapidly. So if I plant a white oak in the fall, I would put that in the ground the following fall. So it won't grow up until the spring. I'll let it grow through the summer, getting some root mass, and then plant it right about now. I don't know. Does that cover it?
I think that sounds great. Sashi asks, can chinkapin oak saplings be planted under or next to red oaks? If so, how much space is needed between trees?
Okay, well, I say you should plant groves of trees, but those trees should be planted at the same age so that they can grow and intertwine their root systems at the same time. If you put a tiny tree right next to a big tree, the big tree is going to shade it out, or the tiny one will live, but you can have a little oak sapling that is 1.5 feet tall that could be 30 years old. It will just sit there until it gets the light that it requires to grow rapidly. So depending on the size difference, if they're both small at the same time, I'm recommending a 10-foot distance, because that's close enough that they will interlock their roots and be nice and stable and form that oak grove that you're talking about. And if you have the space, put 3 in. So you have kind of a triangular oak grove. And people say, does it have to all be oaks? No, it doesn't. You can mix species. It's mixing sizes that's a little bit harder. They won't interlock their roots as well.
Deborah said, I have several oaks which were planted by squirrels. I need to move them from their current location. I assume because they're not in a good spot. Squirrels don't always put them in the best place. She asked, what do I do to ensure their success?
Well, it depends on how many years they've been there. If they planted them last year, move them right now, and they should be fine. If they've actually been there for 5, 6, 7 years, you'd be surprised how big that root is, and you'll probably have to break it off. So you can do that. I moved an oak when we moved to our new house from our old house. It was about 2 feet tall. It had been in our front flower bed, planted by a squirrel, but it was 3 years old. It did make it, and it's a fine tree now, but it struggled the first year because I had to chop off so many roots. So give it a try. You got nothing to lose. You probably can't leave them in your front flower bed. So,
what do you think of planting non-native sawtooth oaks for turkeys to eat their acorns instead of native oaks?
Totally unnecessary. And sawtooth oak is invasive. It's spreading everywhere. It does make a lot of acorns, but there's some studies that show they're so bitter that most of the animals don't like them anyway. We have 91 species of native oaks. Why do we need the Chinese oak? Who was supporting the acorn production before we discovered Chinese oak? It's just unnecessary. Got plenty, Shumard oak makes a ton of acorns. So, and so does any healthy oak. Stick with the natives. That's my unbiased opinion.
I think we have a few people on that would probably cheer for that answer. Mary asks, can you share a brief promo of your homegrown national park initiative?
Sure, be happy to. Years ago, I was sitting in my kitchen early Sunday morning, and I just found the statistic that we have over 40 million acres of lawn in this country. And I said, well, what would happen if we cut that area in half? That would give us 20 million acres we could put towards conservation. How big is 20 million acres? And I started to add up the area of our major national parks, and it could add up all the major national parks, and it was still less than 20 million acres. So I said, well, gee, we could have the biggest national park in the country. If we do it at home, we can call it Homegrown National Park. And that's how the idea came about. So I talked about it in my talks, but that's all I did was talk about it. Then finally, when I wrote Bringing Nature's Best Hope, I wrote a chapter about it. Well, make a long story short, I met a woman, Michelle Alfandari, who said, you need to get beyond the choir. You need to use social media. You need to have a hook. And in our case, it's the map to draw in people who are not already converted, or it's not going to work. And I said, I agree, but I don't do that stuff. And she said, well, I do that stuff. So we created this nonprofit, and she gets all the credit for it, called Homegrown National Park, with a board and everything else. And the problem is it's free. So it's a problem for us, because you can join Homegrown National Park, you register your property where you live and the amount of area that you are protecting now, or you're going to protect, or the area you're going to reduce from lawn. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a single flower pot. That counts. Any place where you're being a good steward of your property. And then your area of your county will light up with a little firefly. And the object is to get the whole country to light up. So I say it's a problem. It's a problem because we are a nonprofit that has no income. And that doesn't work very long. So we need to find a way to actually generate enough income so that we can have paid employees and really do this. We've got over 10,000 people on the map at this point. And people say they're excited about it. We're working with a tech company to get not just your county to light up so you can see who else is participating, but the whole country. So you can see who's participating around the country, where we have gaps, where we need to build biological corridors. We're hoping that the message that you're all important in conservation will go viral. And that's the purpose of the map. People want to join Homegrown National Park just so they can see their area light up and they can be part of this conservation movement. And my sense is that it's actually working, but it's working so fast and with everybody with great ideas of what we should do. It's still really just Michelle and me, and we can't handle it. So we need to come up with some support for Homegrown National Park. If you would like to donate your latest lottery winnings, that would be great.
I put a link to Homegrown National Park in there. I recommend you all check it out because it is a pretty neat concept and an exciting opportunity. Marion asks, thank you for all you do for native plants, insects, and oaks. I'm concerned about the threats to oaks in forest ecosystems, especially the lack of regeneration. It's hard for the public to comprehend that this species needs disturbance, and we have to manage for it with timber harvest and prescribed fire. Any advice and maybe an idea for your next book?
I'm going to write my next book as soon as I finish my email, which is never. Well, you're right. Plants germinate and grow quickly when they have sun, and the depth of a forest, that doesn't happen very often except where there's a tree fall. Oaks do benefit from controlled burns. That's what the Native Americans did for thousands of years, actually, and it favored oak survivorship because it depressed things like maples and cherries. Our forests used to be much more open than they are now because of the large grazers that used to be there. And I'm not talking about cows. I'm talking about all those big Pleistocene mammals. The wood bison used to go all the way to the Atlantic. And you hear the settlers say they could ride full speed through a forest on their horseback without any problem at all. That's how open it was. So it was much easier for things to germinate and thrive. But most people don't understand that. Yeah, if you thin a forest, they get upset. It's called management. It's called we're gardening the world because we're dominating it. The way we've introduced plants from other continents, the way we have removed the predators that keep white-tailed deer controlled, these create enormous ecological challenges, which means we can't just sit back and let nature take its course. We can't prevent nature from taking its course on the one hand and then sit back and wait till it corrects itself. We've got to actively manage. And the only way to get around that, I think, is education. So I'll think about it for my next book.
Tara said, thank you for a fascinating presentation. You mentioned the loss of our giant oaks. Excuse me. I recently started collecting acorns to plant and try to regenerate new oaks in our area. I found a very old swamp white oak by Lake Monroe, and I'm wondering if it's better to harvest acorns from a particularly vulnerable oak to continue their DNA, or does it make a difference?
It's not a bad idea. That oak has survived for, could be just by chance, but it could be because it's got superior genes. It could be because it's got resistance to some of these diseases. So you're doing exactly the right thing. We want to plant as many acorns as we can now. I do hear people say, oh, with all the oak diseases around, we shouldn't plant oaks anymore. That's exactly the wrong response, in my opinion, because we've got to get the oaks with the resistant genes into our forest. The ones that are susceptible will die. That's right. But not all of them are susceptible. I've got oak leaf scorch on my property, and a couple of my red oaks have died, but others look great. So those are the ones that are going to produce the acorns that you can gather up and plant. If you have a large swamp white oak, absolutely gather up those acorns and germinate them and put them someplace else.
Jessica said, by putting them in the fridge, does that mean they need cold stratification?
The red oak group does. The red oak, white oak group, remember, germinates in the fall before it's cold. So that swamp white oak is going to germinate this fall. So you want to plant them right away.
Laura asked, what impact does agriculture herbicide drift, 2,4-D or dicamba, have on the species which depend on oaks?
There has a huge problem. It's not dicamba and it's not 2,4-D. It's another one that's escaping me. There's people in Iowa working on it, but it causes oak leaf tatters, I think it's called, and it's from drift. That is happens when these herbicides are applied and there's any wind at all. They also get into water and move. So look up oak tatters, and it's directly caused. It's been shown as directly caused by the herbicides that growers are using. The frustrating part about it is we know how to prevent that. If you encapsulate the products so that it's a slow release once you put it in the ground, there will be no drift. There'll be no dust that floats around. It's a little bit more expensive to do that. And there are people trying to convince the herbicide companies to do that. But there is a toll on our oaks and other trees as well from all that herbicide use.
Diana said, our area is experiencing an explosion of crime. Therefore, more people are leaving lights on at night for safety. How much does this reduce insect populations?
Light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect decline. You know what? The studies have also shown that the more heavily treed an urban area is, the more crime is reduced. So planting trees actually reduces crime, if that helps at all. I recommend a motion sensor because it will only turn on when the bad man comes, and that scares them away. When a light is on all the time, they can easily see where the shadows are and very easily dodge it. Or you switch to a yellow bulb. Yellow wavelengths are not attracted to nocturnal insects, particularly the moths. So you can reduce insect kill by using a yellow bulb and still keep the bad guy away. So that's the easiest thing to do, is take out the white bulbs and put in a yellow bulb.
Those are great recommendations. So your book was organized by months. Which one is your favorite?
Which month?
Yes.
I have never gotten that question before. I like the springtime. I like it when everything is bursting forth. Life really gets going. So I would say May is my favorite time.
It is quite a busy time for oaks, that's for sure, and the insects and birds that are interested.
That's
Well,
right.
I think we're going to wrap up now. It looks like we've hit the end of our questions for the most part. And I want to thank again Dr. Doug Tallamy for taking the time tonight to be with us. He's got a very busy schedule. He's teaching, and the semester has started, so I can't imagine how he's juggling all those balls right now.
Really.
We thank you also for joining us tonight, all of you, and hope you enjoyed this presentation. I know I sure did. If you're interested in forestry or a woodland owner, please check out our website and for current information. I'm going to send a follow-up email with information on the upcoming events I listed in the chat box, and I will be notifying you when the recording is available for viewing. So have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.